Ever since China had a communist revolution when the leaders mixed Confucianism and communism, the country has been growing at an increased rate each year, to where they are now one of the world leaders in the global economy, basically on par with the US. While we disagree with many of China's policies and American policies in China, our dependent trade relationship with China is a necessary part of the global economy because the overall growth that the two countries have combined stimulates the economy at a rate that cannot be achieved by one superpower working alone. In 1949, Chinese communist leaders, specifically Deng Xiaoping, realized that imposing communism on the rest of the nation was a terrible idea because all the traditional farmers in rural areas were totally against the change. Deng decided to mix Confucianism and communism to create a hybrid form of government, as to convince the farmers to follow him and unify the country. Ever since then, China has been expanding and industrializing, growing into a superpower whose economic strength and stability rivals and may even surpass that of the US. Ever since the late 1800s, when the U.S. forced the open-door policy on China, the U.S. has been sending large companies over to China to set up factories and a base for operations for cheap labor around the world. When the companies would set up shop, Chinese farmers, desperate for work and money to feed their family, would go in the factories for low wages. They would end up mass-producing goods that would then be shipped all over the world and stimulate the economy. This was the beginning of sweatshop labor. Nowadays, we do the exact same thing with China, but on an even larger scale. Because of our increased sweatshop labor with China, we have grown to be dependent on them and they have grown dependent on us. Without each other, each economy would decrease greatly and the global economy would lose much of its strength and stability. According to the Daily Mail, Chinese sweatshop labor is on the verge of torture. Not only do people get paid extremely low wages and have barely enough money to survive, but they work 80 hours a week and do the most humdrum task. The working environment is so bad that the executives put safety nets below the windows of the dormitories to keep people from committing suicide. The harsh reality is that people need the job so badly that they are willing to endure the terrible working conditions and standards just for the smallest amount of money that will keep them alive for another day. However, while the Chinese sweatshop labor is described as a horrendous environment, the mundane jobs that the millions of Chinese workers perform is one of the major economic boosts in the world. Huge companies such as Nike are able to get very cheap labor in China and then sell their goods at a very low rate in comparison to what it would cost to have people work for an American minimum wage. The lowered prices stimulates consumerism, which boosts world trade and creates new, enhanced connections across the international market. While terrible in nature, Chinese sweatshops are a major part of the world's economy because they create low prices, which lead to enormous consumption of products. The U.S. trade relationship with China is the glue that holds the world economy together. Not only does the single trading relationship help the individual countries, it also greatly helps the world. According to PBS Frontline, our trade and economic competition with China helps to create millions of jobs for them, and almost 1 million jobs for the U.S. While China still manufactures many of our products, they have also been expanding rapidly to come up with their own new ideas of products to put on the global market. When China expands their spheres of influence to stimulate the economy even more than they already are, we do the same, as we are in a race to becoming the greatest country on the planet. Because of all the competition, the level of economic play, and the amount of trade happening in the world is rising more and more, illuminating a global economic trajectory of the world being extremely efficient in importing and exporting products, coming up with new technology to change the way people live, and getting dependent nations back on their feet to compete on an international market. Our relationship with China is an essential part of the global economy because each country is wealthy enough and developed enough to help keep the world economy going, even in unforeseen crisis. The World Economic Forum states that China was a key player when the U.S. and other countries entered an economy recession and collapse. And not only does China's economy raise the standards and grow the global economy, but it also is a solid cornerstone in case other countries have economic issues. According to RAND, China has been a huge player in strengthening the country's infrastructure. Basically, It gets the developing nation back on its feet and gives them the path to becoming part of the global market. According to China's foreign political and economic relations and unconventional global power, China took a great risk by entering the economic market and other world organizations, such as the WTO, that would increase its power and influence over the global economy. They sacrificed their domestic security and stability for a chance at helping to create better global stability. While China did this in part for their hunt for spheres of influence and power in the world, they were also attempting to bring more countries into the global market, which would then increase trade and global relationships. If more countries were involved in the global market, there would be more resources going around and more global trade other than just superpowers. China is a safety net for the U.S. and other countries because their stable economic growth allows them to keep the economy going, even when other countries are unable to participate. In conclusion, China's interdependent relationship with the U.S. is a key factor in the growth of the global economy and the playing field at which the economy operates. The relationship keeps the economy running efficiently and effectively and increase the overall stability of all the countries in the world. While many Americans might disagree with our relationship with China, the U.S. is dependent on them and them to the U.S., and both countries working together is the symbiotic relationship that strengthens and stabilizes the world economy.